Hi guys, welcome to AP US History with Lennox. I'm Lennox, and today we're diving headlong into the Spanish colonial system. AP US History topic 1.5 covers labor, slavery, and the caste system in Spanish colonial America. So let's get going. In our previous video, topic 1.4, we looked at the Columbian Exchange, and one of the primary commodities within the Columbian Exchange was people, specifically African slaves. But how did we get to a point where African slaves were being brought over to the Americas? Let's talk about that briefly. You see, shortly after Columbus arrived on San Salvador, word got back to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Knowing that they were sitting on unbelievable amounts of riches, they issued, with the authority of the Pope, the requerimiento. I'm butchering the name, I apologize, but if you translate that word, it's called the requirement. And this was issued about 1512, 1513, right in that area. And what it essentially said was, under the authority of the church, the Spanish crown has the right to claim lands in the Americas. Part of the requirement of claiming those lands would be that they convert the Native Americans. That's where you see religion as a motivating factor for Spanish colonization. So what the king and queen are going to do, and what the Spanish government is going to do, is they're going to start sending priests over to Spanish North America. And the priests had the full protection of the crown. And they established missions or churches that they would use to start converting Native Americans. Sometimes we refer to it as the mission system. And what they told the Native Americans is, if you convert to Catholicism, you too will have the protection of the church, meaning you too will have the protection of the crown. If you don't convert, if you don't subject yourself to Spanish authority, you could either die or you will be cast into slavery. Now, the reality is most Native Americans were already being put into slavery because the king and queen also gave a group of men called encomenderos the right to go in and settle lands and control anything on that land, including the people. So if I am an encomendero, I get a piece of land in the Americas, and anyone living on that piece of land, I can force them into slavery. So that's kind of what's going on over in colonial America at this point, Spanish colonial America. And this system that the encomenderos are going to use, this system of slavery, is often referred to as the encomienda system. Encomenderos, encomienda. You see the connection? The problem, though, that they were facing is within the labor systems, within Native American slavery, it wasn't a sustainable labor force. If you remember correctly, another big part of the Columbian Exchange was germs. And diseases were sweeping their way through native populations. And they were dying so fast that they could not keep enough workers within their encomienda system. If they didn't die, it was very easy for Native Americans to escape. They knew the terrain, they knew the area, so they could very easily escape from the encomenderos' land and hide and never be found. A new source of labor was going to be necessary. So let's now go back to the Columbian Exchange and the exchange of people and look at how African slaves came to the Americas. Now, the African slave trade had long been established. In fact, there's a long history of slavery within the continent of Africa. Typically, as a result of wars, losers would become slaves of the winners. Or if you had a family member die at the hands of someone else, a slave would be given in order to replace that life. But the big thing about African slavery in Africa was it was never or rarely for life, and it was never generational. Now, the Portuguese had built a trade network along the African coast, and they actually started trading for African slaves. The commodity they were using was guns. There was a high demand for guns in Africa, and so the Portuguese used their access to guns to trade for African slaves, and some slaves were going into Europe and other places in the world. And it's going to be the Portuguese who introduce African slaves to the Spanish colonies. Now, the question you might be asking yourself is, well, how did they justify this? Well, in the 15th and 16th century, when the Spanish came in contact with African slaves, what they saw was something that was completely different than anything they were used to. These folks had a different culture, they spoke different languages, they danced differently, they worshiped differently, everything about them was different. And what the Portuguese did, what the Spanish did, was they equated that difference to being non-human. I know. The absurdity of it is just flashing in front of our eyes, but that's what they did. The church at the same time also justified slavery over any moral concerns, and they did that by referencing a story in the Bible. You probably know the story of Noah from the flood, but the story you might not know is of an evening where Noah got drunk and stumbled into his bedroom and was naked. They don't like to talk about that much. Well, his son Ham came in and discovered him. And instead of covering his father's nakedness, which would be the honorable thing to do, he went out and told everybody, hey, my dad got drunk last night and he was laying around the house naked. Well, in the Bible, what transpired, Ham's son Canaan was punished in that he was told, you and your descendants will be servants forever. And so what the Portuguese and the Spanish and the church said was, these African men and women must be descendants of Ham and Canaan. And so we're justified in making them our slaves. The truth is, that's not how the story went. It was a complete misrepresentation of what the Bible actually said. But what they did was they twisted it to fit their needs at the time. So the Portuguese are going to introduce African slaves to the Spanish colonies. And with the African slaves, the Spanish don't have the same problems. The slaves have already been exposed to Spanish germs, so disease is not a problem. It's going to be very difficult for them to escape as they have no idea where they are, and they're really not going to be able to hide that much. So African slavery became a mainstay in the Spanish colonial system. As we know, the Spanish are going to make a huge amount of money from their colonies over in North America. And that's going to allow them to become economically and politically powerful in the world. This wealth is going to lead Spain to transforming their political and their economic system. And when we look at the economics, their biggest way of raising funds is taxation. The Spanish had to look at how are we going to tax the people over in Spanish North America, in the colonies. Well, at this point, the economic taxation system was set up where the poorest paid the most in taxes. The wealthier you were, the less you paid. And so due to that, the Spanish said, we've got to create some sort of system to know who's going to pay the most taxes and who's going to pay the least. And that's where the caste system is going to be established. Now, smack at the top of the caste system is the peninsulares. These are men who were born in Spain and have come over to the New World. Spanish men born in America, they are the Creoles. They are the next tier of the caste system. Below them is the mestizos. Mestizos were a mix of Spanish and Native American blood. Next is the mulattoes. The mulattoes was a mix of Spanish and African blood. And then you had the African slaves, and at the very bottom was the Native Americans. And this became the Spanish social structure in the Americas. Now, why this is so important, this caste system that was established in the early to mid 1500s in Spanish America is going to become a foundation or a baseline for colonial society going forward. You're going to see the same type of structure, not just in the Spanish colonies, but also in the English colonies going forward. But that's a later topic. So that's it. That's topic 1.5. If you have any questions, post them in the comments below and I'll answer them. If you have the opportunity, go ahead and hit that subscribe. But otherwise, we'll see you on the next one. Have a great day.